Pontiac Fiero. You got a Pontiac.
Hi, thanks for checking out this segment of my 3800 Fiero build video. If you intend on using the automatic transmission intended for your 3800 engine, then this video should give you the guidance needed to build your own custom axles. This video can also be helpful to anyone looking to rebuild an axle or even building a custom axle of their own using the necessary axles for their particular swap. When building your custom Fiero axle, it is important to know that you must use OEM GM axles. You can search for OEM axles at your local salvage yard or places like eBay. Aftermarket axles are not recommended and will not work. The reason is that there is no standard among aftermarket manufacturers when it comes to quality and size. In this video, I will take apart an aftermarket outer CV joint and show you how it does not fit with the OEM Fiero axle like we want it to. Also note that this custom axle is for the passenger side only. We will be using a stock driver's side Fiero automatic transmission axle on the driver's side. There's less torque that runs through this side, and this axle should be sufficient in handling the power output. To build a custom passenger axle, you will need a driver's side GTP axle, a passenger side GTP axle, and any manual transmission Fiero axle. Let's go ahead and get this build going and try it out, and I will show you how to install it into your transmission. I hope you find this video useful, and please check back for more 3800 build videos. Thanks. In this segment of my 3800 build videos, I'm actually going to be building custom axles. This video is actually pretty helpful for anyone building axles of any type for any vehicle. In this particular case, I'm using it for the Pontiac Fiero 3800 build. And to do that, I'm going to go over some tools real quick that we'll need. Not too many, but first and foremost, we're going to need some locking ring clips or pliers. There's two different types. You've got the separator and you've got ones that squeeze. For these axles, we actually want the one that will separate. You'll also need a flathead screwdriver, and in my case, I like to have a hammer of some type to help pound some things out. That's usually what you need. I also recommend, this is a very messy job for any of you doing this, I highly recommend lots of rubbers and paper towels for cleanup afterwards, because this gets pretty messy. So let's take a look at what axles we're going to use in this build, and then we'll move on to the disassembly of the axles. So as you can see, we've got two 3800 axles and one manual transmission Pontiac Fiero axle. These axles are the ones that we're going to be doing the most work with. As you can see with the Fiero, I've already taken the outer CV joint out. We've got the passenger side axle and we've got a driver's side axle, and all three of these axles are what we're going to use to build the passenger axle. This passenger axle will be spared mostly. We're going to take the inner CV joint and we're going to move it over to the driver's side axle, and then we're going to remove the outer CV and we're going to pop the Fiero CV on it in this case. So all said and done, the driver's side axle is going to be converted into a passenger side axle because this is the length we need for the shaft, and this will pretty much be thrown away in this. Now I'm going to actually show you a disassembly of the outer CV for the Fiero, or for the GTP axle, and that's just to demonstrate because I've already taken it apart, cleaned it, and makes it a little bit easier to show how to disassemble the axle. So you don't necessarily need to take this end apart, but I'm going to just as a demonstration. So we'll go ahead and start disassembling our axles and see what we end up with. Okay, this is the driver's side GTP axle. One thing I do want to clarify is we want to work with OEM axles. These are all pretty consistent. The aftermarket axles have different shaft lengths, different quality of build, not usually as durable and reliable as the stock axles. So you might want to find one of these online or at a salvage yard, and I recommend that for all the axles because you want to be consistent, and GM is much more consistent with their axle builds than a lot of these aftermarket companies. So we're going to go ahead and remove the retainer clip first. With that, I'm going to use a flathead screwdriver and possibly a hammer to try and pry up on the clips. It takes a little bit of persuading to try and bend them up and pop them off. And the idea is we want to remove or unseat the clips so the ring can pop off. If possible, we could try and reuse the clips. Doesn't always happen, but if we can, we will. Alright, there we have it. We do the same thing for the other end of the boot. Alright, now we got the snap rings off, we're going to pry back the boot. Alright, we're going to set this aside. We're going to pull the boot from the passenger side CV joint. Alright, with the driver's side inner CV joint removed, we're going to swap it out with the passenger side that I've already removed and have ready to go. And we're just going to basically stick this right on. I'm just going to work the boot back into place. There we go. Finally got it snapped in. I'm just going to clean it up. Alright, so next step is we're going to remove the outer CV joint on the driver's side axle, and we're going to replace that with the Fiero's outer CV joint. But I'm going to show the demonstration on how to take apart the outer CV on this passenger axle. I've already taken apart, cleaned grease out, reassembled it just to make it a little easier to follow along when I take it apart. So we'll go ahead and use this one as the example, but we'll actually be doing it on this one to install the Fiero's outer. Alright, so for this I've already removed the bands, so it's just a matter of sliding the boot off and sliding it back. Alright, this is the inside of the CV axle, and what we're actually going to do is we're going to remove this clip, this retainer clip here, and we're going to drop the axle right out, and then from there we'll remove the inner race and all the bearings. Alright, I usually keep the CV axle on the floor, and I want to try and hold it as close to a 90-degree angle as I can so it'll drop straight out, and I'll hold it with my feet. But we're going to try and separate the clip, which will then cause the axle shaft to slide right out. And some of them are a little easier to work than others. And I wouldn't put too much tension on the CV until it's separated, or on the shaft until it's separated. Alright, so now we're going to start removing the inner race, the cage, and the bearings. Now normally this is completely covered in grease, but to make it a little more visual, I cleaned it out and kind of did this prior. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a screwdriver and just carefully tap with a hammer to influence this up. And what I'm going to do is try and free the first bearing. And once you get far enough out, you should be able to pop the bearings out. There we go. Alright, so I'm just going to continue on the floor. It's going to be a little easier. Alright, so to remove this from the cage, all we do is spin it and then twist it so that one of the openings kind of lines up and should just slide right out. Just like that. Now to take the inner race out, it's kind of the same deal. You just kind of spin it and then work it out. And there we have it. Alright, now that I've shown you how to remove the outer CV on the passenger axle that I already prepped to demonstrate, I went ahead and removed the driver's side outer CV, and what we're going to do is basically take the Fiero's manual transmission outer CV with the internals of the GTP CV and stick it inside and stick it on. And the reason that we do that is because the shaft sizes are different between the GTP and the Fiero. The GTP has a thicker axle, so the inner race for both will be different sizes, and I'll show you. Alright, so as you can see here, this is the Fiero's inner CV. This one I cleaned up and made it a little easier to tell. Switch it around for you. And this one, not so clean, I just removed from the GTP. And you can see the inside shaft is thicker than the Fiero's. So this is what we have to switch in order to make this custom axle work for the Fiero 3800 axle swap. And here is the outer ring for a Fiero or GTP CV. This is the same, only this is an aftermarket CV. And as you can see, the aftermarket outer ring is larger. So when trying to fit that into the Fiero's outer CV, it doesn't fit there's nothing we can do to get this to work, which is why we suggest that you go with OEM as opposed to aftermarket, because there's no standard on aftermarket, whereas GM has standardized it. This is the same for the GTP as well as the Fiero, and it fits in just nice. And I'm sure some of you are familiar with axles. This passenger side axle is actually aftermarket. I had ordered it from a salvage yard, and when it came in I was a bit disappointed. I had to prepay for it. It was an aftermarket and it wasn't really useful, which is why I decided to use this as the test dummy to show you how to take apart the outer CV, because I didn't mind cleaning up the grease and making it work. But as you can see, the races, or the outer rings, are different, so definitely don't want to use aftermarket axles. And you can tell the difference, at least in this case, between the two, mainly because of the inner CVs. GM stock axles tend to look a lot like this, and the aftermarkets can be completely round, or they can be slightly indented, and not quite the same as this. So that might be at least one way to indicate if you have a stock axle or not. I got lucky because when I ordered my transmission, it came in, it actually had the inners stuck in it. So even though this came in not being correct, I was able to reuse the one that came with the transmission. And if that's the case, you actually don't need a passenger axle, because the inner is all you need. The rest of the axle can be tossed. So in this case I didn't need this axle. I was able to use the inner from the transmission, mount it to here, and we'll go ahead and start mounting up the Fiero's outer CV. Now, what I'm going to do in this case is, for demonstration purposes, I cleaned out the grease on the Fiero's CV end. So I'm going to borrow some of the grease on this. Stock axles actually come with a pretty decent grease. So as long as it's not dirty or burnt or has anything visibly wrong with it, it's usually okay to reuse the grease, which is something I'm going to do for a budget build. You can buy new grease if you like, but in my case, I'm just going to reuse it. I saved it. It seemed like it was in pretty good shape. It wasn't discolored or anything. So I'm just going to borrow what I can out of this. The other reason I cleaned this out is I wanted to check it for wear or any fatigue, so it looked okay. I'm going to reuse the grease that I've taken out of it. I'm just going to coat the inside of that pretty good. I am actually using the GTP race with the Fiero's cage. The cage difference between the Fiero and the GTP is slightly different. It's a very snug fit with the GTP cage in the Fiero's outer CV, so it doesn't really fit in well enough to get the bearings in. So what I'm going to do is put the inner race of the GTP inside the Fiero's cage, and that should hopefully, in theory, work. So we're going to stick it in like so, and once we get both sides in, you just need to rotate it. It is a very messy job. Definitely keep gloves handy. And there we go. GTP race, Fiero cage, and we're going to set this inside the outer CV. Here we have the Fiero's CV, our made up custom innards. We're going to twist it in so that the slots go into to line up like so. All we gotta do is line up the slot with the groove so that the bearing has a place to sit. Everything's in line. Stick it in like so. Give it a tap. And we're in. Let's go to the next one. Here's our first bearing we put in, so I'm going to go with the opposite side. Attempt to kind of pry it up. Alright, so as you can see, we're going to try and get our bearing in. Next one. Okay, now ready for the next one. Number 5. Last one. And the last one, thankfully. Boom! Done. Just gonna grease up the top of this and slide our CV axle shaft through it, and then we'll put some grease in the boot and close it all up. Back to the messy job. Go ahead and grease up the bearings, and then once we get the shaft on and the boot on, we'll kind of plunge it in and out and kind of pump the grease through the bearings. That's good. We're latched on. Alright, so we're going to put the grease in our boot. Go ahead, close this puppy up. I'm going to take a minute to clean this up, and then we'll put the bands on. Alright, now we're coming down to the final stretch on the build. Everything's pretty much together. It's looking good. I got it cleaned up. One thing I did forget to mention at the top of the movie when I was listing the tools was you're going to need some boot clamp pliers. They do have some straps you can buy that don't require tools, but I'm going to go ahead and use these. And in some cases you can reuse the used ones if you salvage them. Pretty nice, and they look like they're salvageable, but I'm going to go ahead and use new ones. I got these at Napa for under $8 for too large and too small. So let's go ahead and strap this thing up. We'll start with the outer edge of the inner CV. Stick it under, over, and you want to make sure you get it just right, tight. Get it to snap in there. Put these on there. Go ahead. Clamp it down. We're good. Got that one on there. Oh yeah, now we do the other side. Sorry for my fingers being in the way. Got the bands all done. Everything's looking good. It moves. So we can go ahead and trial fit this on. I'm excited. I hope it all works out. But just as a recap, we used a driver's side axle for a GTP. We put the passenger GTP inner CV on. So we used on the internal side, on the outer CV, we used obviously the Fiero's outer CV because it needs to fit the Fiero hub. But on the inside we used the Fiero outer ring and the GTP inner race, and then I used the GTP bearings. And there we have it. Let's go try it out. So here we got our custom made axle, ready to put it on. I'm excited to see how this fits up. Let's give it a try. Alright, I'm first going to go in the hub. Okay. Alright, now we're going to put the inner CV into its slot. There we go, clicked in. We're good. Alright, for the driver's side axle, we're actually going to use a driver's side axle for an automatic transmission Fiero. So I'm going to take this off my cradle and I'm going to use that. Let's go put this puppy on. Alright, we've got our axles on, they're good. You want to make sure they're the right size. Just check your range of motion, make sure they're not bottoming out or anything. I mean, this is our custom one. Looks good. We get good range. I mean, at least from what I get on this stand. We got this one here. And they're not bottoming out. We get good range of motion. They do need to be cinched up a little bit more with the air compressor to get the knuckles fully seated in on there. But for the most part, looking good. We're ready to move on. Thanks again for checking out my video on building axles, and please like, share, subscribe, and check out my other Fiero related videos as well as my other upcoming 3800 build videos. Hopefully you'll find them useful and helpful in guiding you in your projects. I'm excited to do this project. It worked out really well, and it's coming along pretty well, so hope that's inspiring for you to start your project. I've got other upcoming videos for Fiero related projects, so feel free to stop in and check them out as they are produced, and hopefully you'll find them just as useful. Thanks again for watching, and take care. Bye.